mid-80s, BMW gave us this, the Bmw M5. It had 210 kilowatts. It went from 0 to 106.5 seconds and topped out at 245 kilometers an hour. It also weighed 1.4 tons or thereabouts, and we'll get back to why that's important later. Then came the E39 M5, the V8, the one with the car phone, and the one that Tiffany Dell drifted so hard the world ran to those order books to get their hands on one. It became a much bigger, much heavier car. But this isn't where the M5 story ends, or where the growth spurt ends. A few years later, BMW and Chris Bangle gave us this, the V10 M5, the one with the SMG gearbox that nobody liked and the design that many thought was not going to work out. It has that engine though. The engine that even someone that's not a BMW enthusiast has to admit is one of the best sounding engines in a production car ever made. And who'd have thought that this would become a future classic? Because look at it now. Following the worldwide trend of turbocharging, the next generation had exactly that. Mated to a 4.4 V8 engine, it also boasted four-wheel drive and shattering performance. But it also had 100 extra kilograms to boot. And now, today in 2025, we have this. It's still V8, it's still twin turbo, and it's still four-wheel drive. But is it still a real M5? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. In the past, you would be forgiven for mistaking an M5 for a 530 or 540, but not this one. This one's got the wide arches, the big wheels, and maybe it's the color, but it certainly does look like a special BMW. I do like these lines on the bonnet over here, and I've got to say the grille, it's not that it's not my favorite shape, but the fact that this is all covered up here means that it could have been bigger or smaller. But when it comes to grills and BMWs, most of them have not been fan favorites, at least not when the car first gets released. The front of the car is not my favorite part, but you can spec it with a front spoiler to give it an even more aggressive look. And speaking of aggressive, look at these wheel arches. Not the same spec you'd find on a 5 Series, and certainly not the same wheels and tires either. Those are 20 inches in front, wrapped in hand-cooked tires, and at the back you got the 21s, so a cool staggered setup. And along the side here, you've got something that is brand new to the 5 Series. That is, of course, for the plug-in hybrid system. If you like carbon fiber, you've come to the right place, because you get it on these mirrors, on this roof, and if you follow me to the back here, on this spoiler too. This to me has to be one of the best angles of this car. I do like those buttresses that protrude, and those exhausts at the back there are the real deal, by the way. You also get the M5 badge, which is cooler looking than older M5 badges, I think. Of course, it's going to be a typical M experience inside, and it's also going to be a tech fest. So let's start with that M experience. You've got the usual chunky BMW steering wheel, which feels familiar, and then of course these paddles at the back here that also feel like it could have been lifted off the M4 and M3. Then you've got the M2 buttons, of course, and a red stripe down the middle to know when you're not going sideways. And then the new screen that BMW has been using lately. So all in all, it all looks fairly familiar in here. Of course, no gear lever. Those have been replaced by little toggle switches. So now I could take you through all the cameras that look amazing, all the features that are built in, etc., 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 because there's a lot going on here. But let's go drive the fast and special M5. what makes an M5 an M5? Well, speaking to the collector that owns those cars that I just saw now, it's supposed to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. That means that sometimes it's supposed to be a sheep. Now, when you think of a sheep in the context of this car, you should be able to herd it in silence to your next destination, and you can with this one. Stick it in hybrid mode, you can cruise at highway speeds and use no fuel whatsoever. You can go to the meeting and your friends wouldn't know that you had an M5 if they saw it from a distance, unless you had this color, of course. But then it also needs to be a wolf. And where that wolf lies is when you press one of these buttons on the steering wheel here. All of a sudden the engine wakes up, the paddle shifts come alive, and you can go from 0 to 100 and faster in a very, very short period of time. So what else makes an M5 special? Well, it's supposed to have a bit of a hooligan element to it, isn't it? Launch control. Oh! And there she goes. I think the hooligan tick box is definitely checked. But there is one more hooligan test that needs to be done. Hooligan test number 2. Check. So back to four-wheel drive mode and back to civility. The M5 was originally the only M car available as a saloon. And therein lies the interesting story about the M5, because there was no basis of comparison when it first arrived. Fast forward many, many years, and BMW then developed the now popular M3, and the M3 took the spot that the M5 once had. It feels like BMW have sped up the steering rack substantially and changed the front steering geometry so that if you're taking a normal corner that's less than 90 degrees, you kind of don't notice the weight that much. So yes, it weighs way more than it should, but there is one major advantage to having all that extra weight. It now means you've got a hybrid system that delivers overtaking power almost instantly. Yeah. I've got an older brother, and when we were younger, he was an exceptional sportsman in cricket, rugby, and pretty much anything he did. He also dated the hottest girl at the church, eventually marrying her, and then going on to become a priest. A priest. How do I fill those shoes? I obviously had to become really good at the things I eventually decided to do. That's where the M5 finds itself. It's got younger siblings that are really good at the job of being younger siblings. The M5 had to evolve, and that's what it did. Will this be the heaviest M5 ever made? I hope so. Will it be the fastest M5 ever made? I hope not. But it certainly has evolved to this point. And for that, we can't blame the M5. We can only blame evolution. Welcome back to Ignition GT. Few cars can lay claim to combining supercar performance with limousine comfort quite as justifiably as the BMW M5 can, and the all-new G90 is no exception. The question is, does it remain faithful to the M5 tradition while also moving the goalposts sufficiently forward? Now, Marek, you've literally written the book on this topic. Okay, so I'm going to throw it over to you. Let's talk new M5. Is it what it's supposed to be, And is it what the market wants?
There's two elements to this. Let's look at it that way. There's a total subjective element, which is hearts and emotions. And then there's the on paper kind of scenario that one gets to look at. And that's where we have to decide which one are we leaning more towards. But for me, the short answer is in both cases, yes, most definitely. You know, do you get out of the car and have a smile on your face? Does it do something to your heart? Does it really energize you? I think so. How can it not? It is something special. It really is. It hasn't been desensitized. It hasn't been muted. It hasn't been, yes, you know, it has to comply with all these legislations that we as consumers in South Africa aren't really even aware of. What's going on in Europe, what they have to comply to. It's something we don't consider.
And that's where a lot of that weight has come from. Matthew, you've driven the previous Gen 1.
Yeah.
Between those two, what are you thinking? A leap forward or a step back in time?
Look, it's definitely a leap forward. I think before we even jump there, it's also good to mention that a lot of people complained about this car being really big and massive. And we have to talk about the fact that this is not a track car. It's an everyday super saloon, and that's where people get it wrong. They're expecting it to have M3, M4 agility when it's not that car. So when they see it and they see the weight and they're like, it's a big, heavy car, it's not that car. And compared to the previous gen was very raw, it was very alive, and it did have a lot of the emotion, especially because it didn't have as much exhaust emissions on it, so you could hear that car. But you always have to go forward and comply. I mean, how do you make this car faster? You're getting the most out of that V8. So the only way you can make it suitable for an everyday person to drive that car is if you add hybrid systems and assistance and make it a clever four-wheel drive. Because if you just throw that amount of power with any of that, it becomes an undrivable car. And then that's what it's supposed to, you know, not be. It's supposed to be something that anyone can get in and drive, whether they like it or not.
Marek, one of the conversations we had, which I loved, was the fact that the M2 and M3 didn't exist when the first M5 came out. And now all of a sudden, I love that we're segueing from what you said there, Matthew. It doesn't have to be an M2, M3, M4. It has to be an M5 in the current ecosystem.
Correct. And you know, Matthew and I haven't had an interaction prior to this interview in terms of where we're standing, and I was very interested to see, you know, where he was going to come from. And to be honest with you, that is the crux of it. You have the M5 was the OG Super Saloon GT. And this is what people tend to forget when the younger siblings come into the picture. Yeah. And the younger siblings are really good at what they do and have a specific purpose. And that's where the M5 actually does deliver in my books. You can't argue that it doesn't. And to come to the weight issue, no one that I've ever come across in my entire existence as a motoring enthusiast and working in the motor industry has ever bought a car with weight as a consideration. There's nothing that makes one car more justifiable than another in this. It's what suits you. What do you want to get out of it? An E46 M3 CSL was different because it was lighter, but you didn't buy it because it was lighter. You bought it because it was different. Yeah. And it had a different application.
I'm going to kick it back to you, Matthew.
Sure.
With regard to the pricing.
Yeah.
Do you think the pricing's fair? Do you think it's justifiable in the current climate? Do you think it slots in where it's supposed to slot in with the pricing?
I definitely think so. Look, at 2650, you're getting a lot of car. When you compare it to what Merc has, the E53 in Europe, it's priced a lot more than M5. And if you look at BMW's portfolio, you've got M8s, which are just over the 3.2s. Then you've got X6M. So pricing, it's spot on because for what it is and what it's offering, I think it's bang on. If it was over the 3-bar mark, I think this would be a car that would raise a lot of questions with potential buyers because at the end of the day, it is a 5 Series. And a 5 Series can't be astronomically expensive, even if it is an M model.
Marek, last statements from you. To the purists out there, what do you say?
I think it's got the best combination of keeping the soul of a car, which for me is a combustion engine, without a doubt. And you look at the way the world is going now, everybody's doing U-turns here. Yeah. And the soul of the car and this combustion engine, which really ignites something in you as a human being, is there. And they've coupled it, they've married these two concepts in such a clever and proper way where they haven't compromised. They haven't gone, as Matthew said, down to 6 cylinders, never mind 6, what about 4? Yeah. And I think if any purist says that this isn't true to it, then they don't really understand what it's about.
Well, I could have conversations like this all day long. And if you'd like to know more about the fascinating history of BMW in South Africa, including that of the locally built BMW M5s, you can scan the QR code on the screen for more information on the 50th anniversary book and how you can get your hands on a copy.